Thank you for coming.
Over to me. I'm Bruce Macdonald, and maybe, I just got this email asking me to do this, and maybe I could say I did go to UBC. I am a school teacher, or was a school teacher. I was working on restoring streams 20 years ago in Mount Pleasant. So I was surprised that I got out the Vancouver book to read the history of Hastings Sunrise just this morning, an hour ago, just to check on stuff, and I was surprised. I had written the article, so I forgot about that. So I actually did write the history of this neighborhood. But I have a real interest in nature, I guess, and the beauty of nature, and how, if you've ever been off in the woods and come across a stream, it's very idyllic, designed by Mother Nature. And I hope to, one practical thing to come out of this walk today would be that now that they have committed to spending $300 million at the PNE to restore what I'm going to call Hastings Creek. It doesn't have a name, but Hastings was the little community at the mouth of the creek in 1865, which makes it the first settlement in Vancouver. It actually had a hotel and Vancouver's first hotel, Vancouver's first post office, Vancouver's first wharf, Vancouver's first. It all started at Hastings. So that word Hastings is really important. Of course, Hastings Street is named because it went from Gastown to Hastings. This whole neighborhood's called Hastings. It was named in 1869 after the admiral of the Pacific Fleet, in the British Empire, when this was part of the empire. So that's where that name comes from. But I was saying, I hope to make people into activists, because I think a lot of people are here, and this isn't an unusual group of people. I think most of you have an interest in nature, and maybe the original landscape that was here. It's a pretty amazing landscape. And the idea of spending $300 million to restore, and then you did use the word restore, we're not quite there yet, because if you look at the restoration that's been done so far, it's all concrete lined ditches with artificially, placed things. It does not resemble nature. Mind you, if you go there the day they unveil it, you go, oh my God, this is not very nature-like. If they leave it alone for 10 years and you come back, it looks natural. And the same thing with what they've done at Hastings Park there. I was there when they unveiled that, wonderful new park. It was like mud with a couple of sticks sticking out of it. You just looked at it and went, oh, this is awful. But you go back there today, and it's like you're 100 miles off in the middle of the woods, in the middle of nowhere. It's turned out fantastic. But we can still do better. So that's sort of one of my main interests, is getting people aware of, how it can be better. Because I hate to complain, but a lot of the architects that get involved in projects, they really have no interest in, they have no knowledge of nature somehow. Maybe they're born in the city, grew up in the city, have gone straight from university to a desk somewhere. I don't know, but they just don't have any appreciation. And by the way, I'm a civil engineer too, so I do appreciate, that if you go down to the beach at Hastings Park there, it's a pile of broken rock, Why? Why? Oh, well, that's prevent erosion. That's what civil engineers do, prevent erosion. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is the end of the talk, but go to Kitsilano Beach. Go to Spanish Banks. There's no big pile of rocks that you can't access the beach there. Why is that? Anyhow. So if we're going to spend $300 million, let's do it right, and hopefully this talk will help you appreciate what used to be here. And I'll just say it right now. This is one of the most fantastic places in the world. It was 150 years ago when explorers came here. They were blown away by what they found here. Some of the tallest trees in the world, some of the biggest trees in the world. Look around you. It's like a bomb went off. There's nothing here, really. Try and find the native plant. Like, of all the original plants, this incredibly complex ecosystem that was here, try and find even one plant. Look around. Anybody see a native plant anywhere? the Douglas firs that were 300 to 400 feet tall. Yeah, that's cedar. You're right. Those cedars are basically native plants. Somehow they got away. The trees 300 or 400 feet tall. I'll just say it now. The reason why non-native people came here. Remember the gold rush? People went to Barkerville. Millionaires are created overnight. Wonderful gold rush. Well, guess what was bigger than that? What was bigger than that, created more millionaires, was the timber rush to this right here place, the Lower Mainland and Vancouver Island. The finest timber in the world. All the millionaires 100 years ago were in lumber business. Guess what? No longer. Macdonald is gone. Why is that? Because 99% of the trees are gone. 99% of Douglas fir are gone. The 1,000-year-old trees that were here. They got cut down as, people made a huge amount of money. Okay, well, and you look around you, you wouldn't know any of this by standing here and looking. And that's the interesting thing about history. History is sort of telling stories. It's almost like science fiction, imaginary stories about something that's not here, not in front of you. Okay, well, we got to get moving. So here we are. We're at Caslow and Charles. And why are we standing here? Well, because somebody did a map called Vancouver's Old Streams, a book that had a map of Vancouver's Old Streams. And the Hastings Creek, which by the way is not named on that map, and there's not one word about it in that book, Vancouver's Old Streams. There's not one word about any of the streams in East Vancouver. They're all the ones on the west side. And so they on their map, this is where the creek comes to. But you know what? The mistake they made, if you're going to do a map of creeks, you have to use a contour map. Because, if you could add a contour map of Vancouver, you could pretty well draw in every creek that ever was here just based on, put it in the valleys. They have to, because gravity takes things downhill. It's just the way it is. If it was raining right now, you know what? The rain would not be going that way. The rain would be going that way. That way is downhill. As a matter of fact, just take a look. This is called a reality check. It's all very nice to have that official map with the creek beginning here. But when you come here, this is reality, and guess what? You can see First Avenue that way. That's where all the cars are whizzing by. Then the top of the hill there is about almost 12th Avenue. And we can look all the way. You can really see this up when you come down Renfrew. You can see Hastings Street the other way, and it's all sloping down to this little valley down here. Well, folks, that's where the creek was. So let's go there. Charles and Nanaimo, yeah. And it happens all the time. They swim across the second narrows, they go to the P&E, they get lost, they come running down here, and then they're in the first in Nanaimo, and somebody phones, I got a deer in my front yard. So, okay, so I'll just say that my map here, which is hard to see the blue rivers, but they're there. I base this not on Vancouver's Old Streams, but when I worked at City Hall as an engineer, the head of the Waterworks Department, Bill Huck, had created a map. It took him 20 or 30 years. And you can see, because he was in the Waterworks Department, the very first drainage sewer pipe they would have put in would have been right here at the bottom in the creek bed. And if you look over there, you can see that the high school is down low. They filled in this parking lot to make it flat, but there's a valley that the school is sitting in. And by the way, the very fact that there's a whole city block here, 2 city blocks, all in one lot, is a big indication that there was a creek here, because these big lots that had a creek going through them never got subdivided. They got subdivided last because they're sloping and there's water, and people didn't want to. I'll just say I'm going to give you this handout, and down here, this is in the 1930s. You can see the route of the creek because no one's built houses. Down here, no one's built houses in that area. And then later on, they either put parks in there or they put schools in into these great big empty lots, because it's the only place left where there's a big lot. So that's a really good indication that there was a creek running through here. Hi, hey, good to see you guys.
This might have been a big bog, this whole depression.
When it's dead flat up there, it would be boggy, and we're going to see the bog. There was a bog down when we get down where it's dead flat. So that's a good point about, here we are at the very beginning of the creek, and it's a different type of ecosystem than when you get to the flat area where it creates a bog, and then as you head down to the ocean there's a ravine. And again, it's a completely different sort of ecosystem. Now, I mentioned that there is an old growth forest here, the tree's 300 to 400 feet tall. Well, the interesting thing about that is, if you're ever in an old growth forest, you can tell, if it hasn't been too windy lately, it's called closed canopy. When you look up, you cannot see the sky. What that means is at ground level, there's basically no plants at all. So in a really tightly closed canopy, at the ground level, you got a bunch of poles sticking up and brown needles everywhere, not a speck of greenery. Then if one tree blows down, like I saw this actually in my own backyard by the Capilano River, when one tree blows down, you get a ray of sunshine coming in, and there'll be a big oval of greenery right where the sun gets in, and then be dead everywhere else. And so there's an amazing variety. Here's a really neat vegetation map. Unfortunately, they didn't do all of Vancouver, but the southern part of Vancouver is mapped, and look at the detail. Look how much variety there is in the ecology, in the plants. So it's not just a uniform old growth forest, right? There's a huge amount of variety.
That's the Fraser River.
That's the Fraser River, right? Exactly. Yeah. And not only that, that's not the only thing going on. This down at the bottom here, they've mapped the brown part. Whoops. God, where is it? Okay, the brown part. Can you see the brown areas? That's burned over areas. And part of the reason why you have burned over areas is two reasons. There's lightning strikes that create forest fires, and the second reason is we've always been told First Nation people, oh, they're very primitive, they hunted and they gathered. They were actually very sophisticated, and the reason why they were sophisticated, they've been living here 10,000 years. They had 10,000 years of knowledge that they passed down to every generation. They had PhDs in local knowledge, and if you don't believe that, read up on these people. They all had PhDs in local knowledge, and if we were to take one of them and put them in the woods, they would do fantastically well. If it took you and stuck you in the woods, you'd probably be dead in a week, you know? So it's pretty impressive what they knew. So these burned over areas, a lot of them are First Nations people burning back the trees that were around the edge of swamps, because cedar trees and everything eventually grow up in the boggy area, and they block the cranberry bushes and the huckleberry bushes and the blueberry bushes get crowded out. So they would burn off the edge of the swamps to keep basically farming the berries. Now, I said this is a reality check because the Vancouver's Old Streams had us up at Caslow and Charles, which is not where obviously the creek was. As a matter of fact, I'm the only person that has ever discovered this map, but I found a fantastic map that was done at the Hastings town site in 1877. So the reason why I knew the creek was here was not only it's the bottom of the hill, but because I have a map of it in 1870, which I can give you, 1877, that shows the creek coming down right to where we're standing. Okay, now, as our homeowner just pointed out, who lives in the White House right there, the front of his, and the creek, by the way, came right down behind his house. And you know, you can always tell, even Celia Duthie, you know, Duthie's books, she told me once, you know, my house, the left side is like this and the right side is sunk down a foot. Now, why would that be? I said, well, you built your house on top of a creek ravine. And he was just saying that the front of his house, the hard pan's 3 feet down, or 2 feet, what was it?
3 feet.
3 feet down. The back of the house, it
was 7 to 8 feet down.
7 to 8 feet down. Because that's the ravine, the beginning of the ravine. And by the way, that's why you go down a hard pan, because you don't want your house to sink. So, and he pointed out one of these houses is sinking. So the creek came just through here, and it didn't go much further because at the end of the block, it's flat. But this map that I got shows you that he's got a little arrow indicating that there was a creek heading the other way, just one block over. So this is the very beginning of the creek. And as I was saying, the kids are all over there. Hey, get out of that creek! They're all in the creek. Can you hear the water in the creek? I like to point out to people, you know, Vancouver's old streams, they still exist because all they ever were was the water, the rain that falls on Vancouver. That's all the creeks ever were. The rain still falls the water still follows gravity down to the ocean. It's still going on. They just put it in pipes. And by the way, let me get a little crack in here. I'm a civil engineer, so I feel I can criticize them. 100 years ago, they started putting in storm drains, and then of course, by the way, in the 1920s, my father grew up in Point Grey. He said in the 1920s, he said everybody had an outhouse and everybody had a chicken coop in Point Grey and everywhere else, because the sewer system hadn't been put in yet. So when they put the sewer system in, I don't know when it was, the 50s maybe, of course they did the easy thing. All they did was take your toilet and attach it to the storm drain. Now that's saving a lot of money, quotation marks, but the problem with it is that what the city engineers did was they basically tried to capture every drop of water that fell in the city. You can see right now all the pavement, all the water falls and all the pavement goes into the storm drain, which combines with the sewer water, and it's like 90% storm water with a small amount of sewage. When it rains really heavily, it overwhelms the system, and so they dump the overflow into Falls Creek and English Bay. And in the 60s, that's why you couldn't go swimming sometimes, because it was full of sewage. So since then, they've been in the middle of separating the systems, storm and sanitary. So, because they were pumping it all across the whole of Western Vancouver, out to Iona by the airport. They're pumping all the stormwater, all the sewage. The pipes are enormous. The pumps are enormous. It's a waste of money. So now they're separating. The only problem is there's 5,500 city blocks in Vancouver, and it costs a fortune to do it. So I think they're doing like 100 a year, 100 blocks a year, and it's going to take forever. So anyhow, but the good news is they finally got smart. It used to be if you built a 10-acre parking lot, the engineers would make you slope it to the middle, catch every drop of water, dump it into the storm and sanitary system. Now guess what? They finally got smart. They make you slope your parking lot the other way, and the water goes into the ground. You don't have to pipe it anywhere. Gee, what a good idea. And then if there's an excess, then they'll dump it into the storm drain. And now whenever the city renovates a park, like they just did Victoria Park, or nearby where I live in Grandview Park, they always put in swales, which are basically creek beds, so that the storm water can be absorbed into the ground. If there's an excess, it goes into the system. So this is the new thing that they're doing. And that's partly what they're doing with this $300 million at the master plan for Hastings Park, is to get the storm water into that system. And right back to where we started 150 years ago, creeks taking water down in the ocean. Okay. Okay, well, let's head down to the swamp, which is that way.
I talked to some local people who grew up around here,
Yeah.
and this used to be a works yard for the city. And in fact, the school ran into a big problem because when they were rebuilding, there was, of course, the ground had oil in it, so they stopped for a long time. They had to clean it up and everything. Well, it's more than a tank, but the school they told me that this was a very wet area, and they planted these trees in order to suck up the moisture.
Oh, that's interesting.
When they built the school, because it was a community school.
Huh. These trees? Wow.
What kind of tree?
53.
They're
So do you remember it being kind of like a
were you here then?
wooded area?
I grew up in this area when I was a kid.
Oh, great. So
Then
did you
we
play?
moved here.
Was there a creek you played in?
No, I used to be up further.
Okay.
But, yeah, there was. Not sure the cost.
The contaminated water, yeah.
Yeah. It's just like
The groundwater.
all the railroads and that contaminated all the land.
Well, certainly in the 50s and 60s when I was a kid, everybody changed their oil in the backyard and dumped oil in the ground.
Yeah.
Back lane or something. No such thing as pollution back then. No. Okay, so if you want to interrupt or contribute or contradict me or challenge what I'm saying, please. You ready? Okay. So take a look around. It's dead flat that way, and it's dead flat that way. It's pretty flat that way, and it's really flat that way. So what that means is the creek came right down here, and this whole area, which I have my map from 1877. It shows up like here's what he mapped in 18. This is before there's any people around here. You can see he's got this sort of I colored it brown, and what it says is swamp basin. Jesus, what does that say? Spruce, cedar,
Sprout, cedar, and spruce. I don't know what that word. What's that word? Sprout. Spruce. Spruce is there.
Yeah.
Scrub cedar. Scrub cedar and spruce in this whole. This is this flat area. The flat area here. You can see the creek coming down, turning the corner here, and then there's this flat area of scrub cedar. Cedars like swamps, but they do get a bit stunted if they're right in the swamp. But around the edge of the swamp, you can get some pretty big cedar trees. So you get something completely different, like I say, from what you would have had just a few blocks over that way. And by the way, what you'll remember that in 1865, just a few blocks further down, they had the little tiny village of Hastings. Not even a village, a settlement. And really what Hastings was like the only place really in the early 1860s. There's no non-native people living in Vancouver in 1860, none. But New Westminster had 500 people because of the gold rush, because it's the mouth of the Fraser River. So what happened in 1863 was Colonel Moody decided that this is one of the Burrard Inlet's one of the finest harbors in the whole world. He knew that this was really where a city was going to develop when they brought their railway across Canada eventually. He knew that. So he laid out a town site here called the Hastings town site, which is all the land between Boundary Road, that's where Boundary comes from, it's the boundary of the Hastings town site, over to Nanaimo and all the way down to 29th Street. So way down to 29th, almost to Kingsway. So that was the town site for the town of Hastings. And that's where Vancouver should have developed, but it didn't. The railway went right by and kept going down to the foot of Granville Street. So anyhow, 1863. Then by 1865, you had Hastings established because they were just building the Hastings sawmill in Vancouver, and they had the Moodyville sawmill across in North Vancouver. Again, those are the two biggest sawmills in British Columbia. Why? Because the best timber in the world was here and nowhere else. It was right here. That's why they made their big investments here. So Hastings was a bit of a stopping point between New Westminster and the new sawmills. Most people would have gone by boat, but if you wanted to walk it, And so in 1865, when they opened a hotel here, it was really for the elites in New Westminster to come in the summertime. They'd lie around on the beach and take it easy. So it was originally sort of a tiny resort area for a getaway for the rich in New Westminster. So anyhow, 1877, 12 years later, there's maybe 30 people living down in Hastings. But there's nobody in this area. What I was going to say was, but in this low flat land, this is exactly where beavers would have built their beaver dams. So there's no beaver dams on this map, but there probably was 12 years before. In other words, they probably killed the beavers and I don't know, maybe broke the dams. So guess why? Because as you were pointing out, hard pads normally 1 foot or 2 feet down, and you have a layer of gravel from the last glacier, and there's no real topsoil in Vancouver. The only place you get topsoil is in swamps. In other words, by topsoil we mean organic material as opposed to just rock. Most of Vancouver is just kind of sandy, gravelly, rocky stuff. Not the best thing to grow vegetables in. You need organic material. So people would drain swamps, kill the beavers, break the dams, drain the swamps, and then this could become a rich farm. So they may have been farming this, I don't know, at some point. I haven't been able to find that. But I will say that assuming that they did break those beaver dams, here's what, if he had been here in 1865, he might have, I mentioned what the Grandview Highway looked like in 1865, or 1877, and here are all the beaver dams, because it's dead flat through there. That's why it's called Still Creek, because the water almost doesn't move. So here's, as I was saying, if you come down Grandview Highway, and I'll give you this map. This is Renfrew, and if you come down this way, the 24-hour Macdonald's is right here. Well, right where the 24-hour Macdonald's is on this map is a beaver house and a beaver dam, and another beaver dam here 5 feet high and 120 feet long, and a lake 600 feet long caused by the beaver, created by the beavers. Now, this is probably what was here. There's probably a big lake taking up this whole area. There's probably a lake 600 feet long right here at some point.
Brian, who lives here, just said that there's a big drain pipe you could drive a truck through.
Yeah, again, you can drive a truck through these drain pipes because, like I say, the city's been trying to capture every drop of water for, where it rains 6 feet a year. It rains this much here in Vancouver. You know, it's not a good idea to collect all the water. Anyhow, so I'll just say that now, the interesting thing about beavers, again, this is on the handout. You know, there's in the whole of Vancouver today, there's only one lake, Trout Lake. You can't count Beaver Lake in Stanley Park because there's no apparent water in it. It's just lily pads. There's no water surface to it. So there's only one lake. But 150 years ago, there were probably dozens of lakes in Vancouver. And by the way, the interesting thing about beaver dams is after you've had beavers damming a creek, like right here, for about 3,000 years, you end up with what we have right here, which is flat, you know, like completely flat land that is, if you dig down here, is probably black soil, like if you were, like the T-swamp is 16th and Main in Vancouver. You know, it's all 10 feet of muck there because the beavers are there for 3,000. But what happens after a beaver's, like Beaver Lake and Stanley Park, after a beaver's been there 3,000 years, it completely silts up. Completely. So there's no lake at all, and you can't build a dam because it's just the levels come up, and that becomes what's called the beaver meadow, and that shows up in my book. I've actually listed the beaver meadows. Well, you can see them. They look like these grassy areas, and clearly, when you get a meadow, as I was saying, the old-growth forest can be just pine needles at the ground level, but in a beaver meadow, you have grass, maybe berry bushes. And of course, this is where elk and deer had something to eat. So there would have been elk and deer around here. There would have been bears because of the berry bushes. Now, no moose in Vancouver. That's a good question. That's a good point, though. I don't know why. You think they would have made it here, wouldn't you? Moose. Yeah, that's a good point. Where are the moose? They're further east, I guess. Beaver meadows. They become beaver meadows. Now here's the interesting thing I just got to say about beavers. When I give talks on the wilderness that was here, I always like to say, you know, we had this pristine wilderness, and then they came. You know, the mammals came, they cut down the trees, and they dammed the rivers, and they built hundreds and thousands of houses everywhere. Of course, I'm talking about beavers. The point being that beavers radically altered the landscape of the whole of North America because they provided the lakes. Almost all the lakes are from beavers. And you know what happens when a beaver builds a dam and floods an area? It rots all the vegetation, right? All the trees die, everything dies, and you got all this rotting wood. Well, rotting wood, insects love rotting wood. So you get a massive amount of insects, and of course that's food for fish and birds. So because of beavers, you get 10 times as many birds and 10 times as many fish as you perhaps normally would get. So they're very, very important. And by the way, insects are highly nutritious. Humans used to always eat insects up until just recently because they're very nutritious. Somebody pointed out that even vegetarians ate insects, and that's how they got a lot of nutrition in the old days. People didn't have a lot of meat, would eat insects. So they're very important things, insects, in the ecosystem. And certainly young fish thrive on insects and so forth, and birds. So, and by the way, like, we don't have, I bet you if you could find an account of somebody who lived at Hastings in the archives that's unpublished, it would talk about the natural environment here. But we do know that there was a huge lake along Kingsway by Joyce, like in that flat, Joyce station down to the next station, the Nanaimo station almost? 29th Street, thank you, station. There was a big lake in there about 4,000 feet long, caused by beavers. Now, there was thousands of birds there land in that lake. They actually somebody had a pillow making operation going on there 100 years ago, where they were killing birds by the thousand and making pillows out of them, you know, feather pillows. So again, the point being, it's just, you know, what was here 150 years ago, it's just so almost unimaginable, but it was, you know, pretty interesting. And just on the topic of, what was here, fortuitously, there was a person living at Hastings, this guy, Jack Fannin. Now again, there's probably only 20 people at Hastings up until 1886. And he was there, he was a shoemaker who lived in Hastings, and he was famous because he made really expensive shoes. But he's a very talented guy. He was an expert shot, expert marksman, expert hunter, expert guide, expert shoemaker, and expert taxidermist. So his favorite thing was to come up here into the wilderness and shoot something, a little bird or who knows what else, and then take it home and stuff it. And so his house, his little cabin, that eventually was completely full of stuffed animals, birds and animals that he had shot. I guess most of them locally, you have to assume. Oh, sorry. So maybe somebody can recognize what's in this picture, but it's a really neat record. I mean, it's unbelievable. There's only 20 people there, and this guy.
An eagle?
Yeah, it's an eagle. Yeah, and this is a cormorant here somewhere. Where's the cormorant? There's a cormorant, I think. So it's a little bit hard to. Somebody would be better at identifying these birds.
I see hawk. I see seahawk.
Yeah, right. A hawk, and there should be some ducks, and there's a seagull there. Yeah, a seagull.
I see seahawk.
So you're pretty good. This guy's picking them off already.
Oh, I see an owl.
An owl. You're right. Exactly. So let me read out what the guy. Let me read out what we know what he had. By the way, here he is. Here's Jack Fannin in downtown Vancouver. George and Granville, standing next to a tree 14 feet in diameter. Again, this is why people came here to cut down the finest lumber in the world. You know what finest means? It means you get the most money for it. So they were shipping, even in the 1860s when they first opened these sawmills, and there's hardly anybody here, they were shipping huge boatloads of lumber to the Imperial Palace in Beijing, to Hawaii, to Chile and South America, to Australia. There's whole towns in Australia built out of our wood. So here's Hastings, where Jack Fannin lived. This is as big as it ever got. That's as big as Hastings ever got. It was never more than 20, 30 people. But still, it had Vancouver's first post office, first. I got it written down somewhere. Yeah, liquor store. Yeah. Okay, so here's the story about. So just imagine there's nobody living out here, and there's this tiny place on this remote inlet, and Jack Fannin's in there with all his animals in his little room, that he's stuffed. And by the way, there is one. They're all gone somewhere else, but except for one we know about. He shot a lynx. Can anybody imagine a lynx being around here? Anyhow, he shot a lynx right about here. He went up the creek, it said, and he shot a lynx. It was on a tree branch. So his thing was to shoot the animal, stuff it, cut the branch off the tree, and stick the lynx back on the branch that he killed it on.
So real attention to detail.
Exactly, a very incredible attention to detail. So guess what happened? He's in his little cabin here in 1886. Here's the story. Talking about Jack Fannin, who lived at a little cottage out at Hastings, just on the little hill above George Black's. George Black's was right on the water. I've often been in his cottage. His collection of stuffed birds and animals started. Guess what happened? Just a sec. I'll just skip over that sentence. It said, packed around the floor and the walls everywhere. Big barn owls, white owls around here. Mink coats, anybody? Martin coats. Everything you can think of. He says, I don't know who it was, but someone, big shot from Victoria, was coming over the Douglas Road, just this little trail that went into his mister. The guy's coming through, this big shot from Victoria. It may have been a judge, maybe probably going to the Hastings sawmill. May have been a judge on his rounds to hold court, or it may have been the premier. It may have been the premier BC, some big shot. Anyway, the story went that he was in Jack's cottage. And this, by the way, how do you get good at anything? You just put a huge amount of time into it. At some point, people recognize it, and all of a sudden you get elevated, So guess what happened to this guy, Jack Fannin? The story went that he saw the collection. He said to Jack, I'm going to see if I can get you moved to Victoria. Now, has anybody ever been to the Provincial Museum in Victoria? That great big building full of stuff? Jack Fannin, started it. He went over to Victoria with his bird and animal collection from right here, and that was the BC Provincial Museum, was his collection of stuff. And then they started with that, and they built it up. Now they have over 100,000
animal specimens in that museum now. It just kept going right up to the present. I read an account, long ago in some journal about, in his cabin, he kept a mountain goat, a tame mountain goat, or with his cabin. Jack Fannin had a tame mountain goat. By the way, I guess... Well, he was shooting stuff all the time. As a matter of fact, I got a picture of it. I guess I don't have it with me. A picture of him and a friend, and they got their rifles. And on the ground in front of them are 6 great big mountain goats, dead of course, and 4 bears. There's 10 dead animals, and they're smiling away. They killed all these animals. It's wonderful. So, okay, well, here's Hastings again. This is the mouth of the creek. It never got any bigger than that. It was always... And Vancouver was never more than a block long before the railway got here. So when the railway came steaming through and it kept on going, that was when Vancouver now became how big it is now. And by the way, I'll just say on the topic of, it's wrong of me not to have mentioned the First Nations people, of course, and so far. But let me take this opportunity to say that First Nations people have been living here for 10,000 years, about 10,000 years. So, there was a First Nations name for Hastings, and that name was Canamoot. And it's interesting that when I did my book, and I did that First Nations map, I've actually got a Squamish and Musqueam word, 2 different languages. And so in the International Phonetic Alphabet, I have the Squamish and Musqueam pronunciations of all the place names around Vancouver. Then I have a translation, what the word meant in English, and then I have an anglicization of the native word. But what's interesting is that about the only word that the Musqueam and Squamish people said, I have no idea what that word means, don't have a clue, was Canamoot. Actually, we know what it means. It means appear or be born. But for some reason, it's not really on the Squamish and Musqueam list. Canamoot, K-H-A-N-A-H-M-O-O-T, Canamoot. Anyhow, so it means appear, be born. So what does that mean? It's almost like that's where it all started, right? So anyhow, has anybody ever read any of James Michener's books, like Hawaii?
Oh yeah. They sell them by the pound.
They were hugely popular in the 70s and the 80s. He cranked out half a dozen really big bestsellers. He actually lived in West Vancouver, half the year. But anyway, James Michener, he wrote Hawaii. What else did he write? Iberia.
Poland.
The Drifters, yeah, Tormelinos. I read The Drifters. Anyhow, but Hawaii and Iberia were great, long, epic books that covered the whole history of those places, right? Like you go back 10,000 years or something. So anyhow, there's these 2 writers that had cranked out 10 books, and then they decided that they would do a novel called Vancouver in the vein of James Michener. In other words, a great big epic story going back 10 or 14,000 years and then coming up to the present. So, and HarperCollins published it, and they spent a lot of money on it because they thought it would become a worldwide bestseller, just like Michener's books did. That was the whole plan. I don't think it happened, but anyhow, I did go to their book launch. This is about 1993, I think. Yeah, and it was in the panorama roof of the Hotel Vancouver. The book launch was. So this was extravaganza, big unveiling, lots of publicity, and it tells the story of the first people that came to Vancouver. And the story starts in Siberia. I think it's 14,000 years ago, and it follows these people struggling across, the Bering Sea and then coming down the coast, and eventually they end up at a place called Canamoot. They finally make it to their destination. And so I went to the book launch, and I'll just say that David Cruz and Alison Griffiths, I met them, and they said, oh, by the way, Bruce, we love your book. Your book was by our side the whole time we did our novel. So they actually did base it, Canamoot being the final destination of the First Nations people. They did base it on my map, huh? I probably, I don't know. Hopefully, not that anybody cares, but... So I'll just say that is the epic book. And here's a planned map of what they call East Park. They created the first thing that the first Vancouver City Council did was create Stanley Park. And as you know, to this day, Stanley Park has a wonderful wilderness
all big trees and everything down there. Well, that was always the intention of this park. Well, I shouldn't say always, because here it is with a giant racetrack in the middle of it. But the mayor at the time, when the park was created in 1889, but spread over a few years. Provincial government actually was talking about 1888. I think they formally donated in 1889. And the mayor said, oh, it's going to be this wonderful wilderness, and it's going to be a beautiful park, and everybody's going to love, whatever. Well, you know what the problem was to this day was that when the city of Vancouver got the park, they never handed it over to the park board. It never became part of the park system. So now you know why it's all concrete and buildings.
We tried.
And a bunch of people, it's a whole bunch of people in this group, they're from the Hastings Park Conservancy, and they struggled for years to get it to be a park. Now, who was the guy I met 20 years ago that has his whole basement full of legal documents and he was fighting the legal case?
That was Guy Fawkes.
Guy Fawkes.
Yeah.
Guy Faint, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
So Guy Faint, I don't know how many decades of his life he devoted into trying to legally prove that it was supposed to be a park and it shouldn't be paved over and they should tear down the buildings and bring back the nature. And he was successful.
He came as far as the Attorney General saying so.
Yeah.
But
so
then,
I got to say, I noticed in my history of Hastings in the Vancouver book, I actually have in there that I think it was 1993 they sort of won the case or something, and then in 1997 the PNE was going to be moving, and it was going to move to Surrey, right?
Yeah.
And that the whole thing was going to go back to park. So they tore down the BC building with a giant map of BC, and they put in the lake and everything. But over to you. We need the story from the local expert here.
well, then the provincial government decided that it was not in its realm to run the PNE any longer, and they wanted to do away with it. So they gave it to the city of Vancouver. That was in 19...
It was being run by the provincial government all this time? I thought
Yeah,
they gave
it
it
was
to Vancouver.
provincial.
It was always a provincial
It
park?
was a crown corporation all that time. So now the city had it.
In 1972, with the Barrett government, government took it over, and in that time.
So it's all complicated
Yeah.
and power struggles all over the
I
place.
think the city is scared what to do with it. It's a big money machine, so
Except
they're
it's
very
losing
nervous about it right now. Even more nervous wrecking. That's right. So we'll see.
There's just a picture in the transition between an old-growth forest and I'll just say that when they first logged Vancouver, they only took out Douglas fir, and they left the cedar alone, and then eventually, I guess after the 1880s, with people building houses, then all of a sudden there's a market for cedar shingles, and so forth. So then a cedar mill went in here. I'll remind you that just at the foot of Victoria, there's a little bay there, and that was called Cedar Cove. So, this is right around here. This is probably the creek. There's a creek here. This is actually a blasting accident. They're blasting stumps and somebody got killed, I think, is why we have that picture. That's at the archives. And by the way, there's Hastings town site in red, and this is the ad, and you can see the original part that's not in red was Hastings, but the red part, the provincial government realizing that, I don't know, this is the auction notice in 1906. So the provincial government auctioned off all this land in 1906. That's when it got developed. It didn't become part of Vancouver until 1911. They had an election. 1,201 people voted whether or not to join Vancouver. The vote was 1,200 to 1. One person was against it. Some naysayer. So here's 1915. The creek is still intact. And you talk about restoring the creek. I would say that's what you want to do. You could put in a beaver dam or two if you want a lake, maybe. But anyhow, that should be a bit of a guideline. So here it is. This is more or less the same time period with a lot of forested land still around after they built the PNE. And then just point out the streetcar here. This is Powell coming in, the streetcar delivering people from Vancouver along the streetcar line. I'd like to show you. Now, if you look at my, if you look at this map, the surveyor does right on here the vegetation. So, for example, right where we are, I was saying it's scrub cedar. That's not very big trees, you know. So, were there really any big trees here? And if you look at just where the creek starts, it says here, it says top of the slope and northern boundary of the green timber. So there was green timber right up to where the creek started, and then this is like a burned over. There's a lot of burned over areas where there have been fires. So what do we got? It says down a little bit further south, it says cedar and hemlock, tall and straight, 1 to 2.5 foot diameter. So the biggest trees, according to him, are only this big. So were there any big trees here? How come there's this rumor of big trees? On here we don't have any proof of big trees. Well, as I was saying, here's the 1915. And 1915, the streetcar comes in here. There's a red dot there, and I'm going to tell you what the red dot was. This red dot, and the creek coming down. This is all greenery. This is all forest. So it's still in a, it could have been a park if they wanted it to be. But 1910, the millionaires at Grandview formed the PNE, and they built all these big buildings and everything. And I meant to bring it with me, and I left it at home. But the description in 1910, when they opened the PNE for the first time, they had a section called Skid Row. Skid Row. By the way, there was a skid road coming down this creek when they logged it off. Of course.
That was an exhibition. You mean that was
Skid Row was the sideshow lane. And it's amazing to read. It goes on for like 3 paragraphs. What was in Skid Row? It was, freak shows, and there was the lizard lady, and there's all this stuff, like all this weird stuff. I can't remember. It was just a great long list of
Medieval entertainment.
Oh, medieval entertainment. Yeah, it's shocking, really. It was all like kind of creepy stuff. And right from the very beginning, that's what the PNE was.
No mini donuts?
It's like they imported it from somewhere else. I guess they did. Anyhow, this little red dot here, for all you people wondering if there is such a thing as a big tree around here, I have, when you took the streetcar from Vancouver to the PNE and you got off the streetcar, this is what you saw. This is a cedar tree at the PNE. That's 20 feet across at the ground level, 18 feet across at chest height. This is why the foot of Victoria was called Cedar Cove. This is why there was a giant cedar mill at Cedar Cove. There was 2 or 3 giant cedar mills at Cedar Cove. This is why there was a cedar mill here, because some of the biggest trees in the world grew here, and they were cedar trees. Now, we have pictures of the board of directors of the PNE standing in front of this tree, like they do in front of the hollow tree at Stanley Park. And then, it's gone. Somebody just said, get rid of this stupid tree. It should still be there, obviously. And I gotta say it, if you're gonna restore the creek, you should have a stump like this. There's still lots of them around. They're still being crunched up and bulldozed and thrown away. This is one of the things that should be there.
So,
Huh?
New Brighton Park has one stump in it.
Really? How big? Pretty big, eh?
Yeah.
Oh, good. When I was down there yesterday, it was just grass as far as the eye can see.
So I just want to focus
how
on
we
the
doing?
time, because we'd like to get New Brighton by about 3, because we have
Well,
snacks.
we're only 5 minutes away. Oh, we got 40 minutes to get there. Oh, New Brighton. Oh, you want to go to New Brighton? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to New Brighton. So.
Okay, well, I was thinking of hot chocolate myself. Okay.
Yes, and that's there, and
Okay.
snacks are there, and
Let's
there's
go.
also a little activity. So.
Let's head down to the swamp.
Warm up.
Hope you got proper shoes on. So here we are. You can see we're at the low point. There's a hill going up that way. There's a hill going up that way. There's a low point right here. There's actually a drain right here because this is exactly where the creek went through. They flattened this out a bit to put a field in, but there was a ravine here. It's been filled in. And what happens when you fill things in, they usually sink down later on. So you brought up a sinkhole.
Yeah, about 10 years ago, right here.
This road just disappeared one day. And there's a huge hole, probably the size of a car.
Really?
That just opened up and, I don't know, it's 10 feet deep or something.
Well, I have to say, almost all the ravines in Vancouver, and whenever you have a creek on a slope, you get a ravine. In Mount Pleasant, the ravine was 50 feet deep, which is as tall as these trees. So it is a deep ravine. If you go to Renfrew Ravine is what, 80 feet deep? It's because it's a hillside coming down. On the flat part, you don't get any erosion at all. As a matter of fact, it's the opposite. It fills up with vegetation, or rotting vegetation. So you get the opposite effect. But certainly, almost all these ravines have been filled in. People threw garbage in them. When you had a basement in your house, you would always get a horse and a 2x12 plank of wood and drag it behind the horse and scrape off the first 1 foot or so of soil and try to get down to the hard pan, or at least compacted soil. Scrape off the topsoil. And people would throw that into the ravines too. They'd scrape off the dirt and get rid of it. But certainly they were used as garbage dumps and so forth. So like you say, later on, maybe that starts to rot and ends up compressing or disappearing.
The duff. We used to call that duff tree plant.
Huh?
The organic stuff on top.
Oh.
You scrape it off in order to get into the soil to plant your
Duff?
tree. Called it duff, that was the word.
Duff, D-U-F-F?
Yep.
Oh, I've never heard of that. Okay, duff. Creeks are full of duff.
That's the phrase, love in the duff.
So not surprisingly, if we go across Hastings here, there's a lake, because that's the low point, and that's where they recreated the lake. So let's go take a look at this, what used to be the BC building not very long ago, and I'm sure all of you were in it not very long ago. It's amazing what's there now. Let's go be amazed. Goldfish. Apparently somebody dropped off their goldfish and now there's thousands of goldfish. Obviously there's not a lot of things eating them.
The herons will get them.
Well, they're not much of a meal
When
for a
they're
heron
bigger.
when they're that small. Yeah.
There's supposed to be salmon and
I don't see any herons. So, okay, here we are. And if it wasn't for the traffic noise, you could be in the middle of nowhere. And it's amazing how this has grown up so quickly where there used to be a big building. But, this is what happens when you leave things alone. Let nature do its thing to some degree.
Stop.
So, Yoni, did you have something you wanted to say? Tell us, you were saying you come here every month. So, what do you got to say? Do you ever see anything interesting?
we come here usually about once a year, once a month around then. Usually around the summer, and sometimes we see herrings. Usually they come here to eat. They have been showing up for some reason after they dumped the salmon in here.
Oh yeah.
So I'm not sure about the reason. I'm supposing the salmon are too big and they could hit their feet.
Oh, there's a heron over there. I can see one. Okay. So you're right. They put salmon in here, or trout. They put trout in here all at once in the spring, do they? Or it says over on the other side.
They just restocked it again in this fall.
Just
but
dump a whole pile of fish in all at once.
Last spring they.
So twice a year they're stocking it with fish, and then you can go fishing off the dock down there. Anybody got anything to say about this place?
Yeah, the herons and the kingfishers and the occasional osprey all come here to feed on the cove. And the cove get very big. They can be this big body-wise. So it's a hefty meal.
And you've heard of that?
I've watched kingfishers circles, more than one circle, and then dive and pick up the cove. And it's eating them.
So talking about birds here, build it, they will come. There's now been identified 130 species of birds. Just in this, there's a duck.
Oh, this makes
130 species in this little area.
I think I live a few blocks up that way, and I noticed this year I've seen so many more birds than I ever have.
More birds. You see more and more birds all the time.
Yeah, so I guess this is
Well, not long ago there were thousands of birds, and just like I say, beaver dams create some pretty big lakes, and you get a huge number of birds feeding. This is bird feeding territory as well as fish feeding territory. Look how many there are. There's literally thousands of these goldfish. And they're all over this whole area. If you look back up that way, they're just everywhere. It's quite amazing, really.
So Bruce,
Yeah.
Sherry and I are going to head down
Okay,
and
we'll
set
be
up
there.
the tables and put out the treats. So
Thank
we'll
you.
see, if
Okay,
Linda,
we'll just go down the other end of the lake and then we'll head across,
yeah,
right?
and Linda knows how to get
Linda
there.
will lead us there. Thank you, Linda. Okay, let's get going right here. Although, the interesting thing about what we know about First Nations history here is that, the very first sort of non-native person to settle in Vancouver was 1862. And 1862 is the year that smallpox wiped out 3/4 of the First Nations people. So there may have been people living here in 1862, but I do not believe that they were here in 1865 when they settled Hastings. So, but apparently there is some local story about having come from this Canamu. So, if anybody knows anything about that, please let Hastings Park Conservancy know, or the organizer Sarah there, or anybody about it, because that's important information. Obviously, if there is a real First Nations history that we can document for this area, that is assuming it was here, it would be good to get some hard facts. Okay, so here we are, a little bit of nature. I just have to point out, geez, it'd be nice if you looked this way, you weren't staring at the blue and white tents. You think they would just put a little bit of vegetation across there so you could sort of believe that you were in a wilderness. And the same thing that way. A little bit of distraction to see that giant building. I guess when the leaves are all out, it's a bit more obscured. I would just like to make the point, it's nice to do a slightly better job of creating a wilderness. I just have to make a crack, though, at the architects that get involved in these projects. I mean, look at this bridge that we're standing at. This, I'll tell you right now, this costs about 10 times as much as it might have, because they've got these decorative concrete, which I like, in themselves. It's a little bit like the Lionsgate Bridge, Art Deco-y stuff. But I kind of think it's inappropriate here, myself, to be focusing on some architect's personal, coffee table book, or whatever it is he's trying to create here, because it just costs a lot of money. You'll notice that there's no real reason to have a bridge here, because the water ends 10 feet over. So it's sort of just this decorative element. And I just mentioned it costs a lot of money. And as an engineer, clearly this is not a bridge not designed by an engineer, which they normally are. This is a bridge designed by an architect, which is all about creating decorative elements, like these great big concrete pillars serve absolutely no purpose, except they're nice to look at.
They were trying to respond to the deco theme in the 1920s.
That they tore down, and they tore down those buildings. Again, I would think if you want to respond to a theme, we should go back to Jack Fannon's time in 1865 or 1880s, and have more of a wooden bridge, with wooden, a simple, the kind that they made out of when they cut down the trees for the trail. They used those trees to create the bridge out of the natural elements that were here. I just think that should be the direction it should go in. If anybody cares, anybody else cares, I think it's important. Showing off that building?
They find them of heritage value.
That building
not those
there?
ones, the ones behind.
Yeah, behind that. I know.
The
Yeah,
deco buildings.
Yes. No, because they're built out of old growth Douglas fir and stuff like that. There's some mass. I got some actually pillars out of them in my house. The old growth Douglas fir, the ones they tore down. But again, I just personally think it should be all about recreating the original natural environment, and then if you have to build a bridge, you make it, a primitive style bridge. I think that works better myself. This is just the opposite of nature. So here we are, and again, you can see cars whizzing by on Hastings. It'd be nice if you didn't have that distraction. And I'll just say that if you're working on the idea of restoring Hastings Creek, putting this great big dirt dam in here is sort of the opposite of doing that. This should really be, this should be considered to be a lake formed by a beaver in Hastings Ravine, is really how it should be treated. And I personally think you should have a beaver dam here, I mean, sure, put in a concrete dam if you wanted, but put a beaver dam on top of it, because that's exactly what would have been here. And so, I don't know, for me it's just wrong to sort of, somebody gets out a piece of paper and they design this thing and they put in 500 truckloads of dirt here, and I just think it's wrong. And by the way, well, I'll give you the handout when we get there, I guess. But they're going to be bringing back the creek, and I guess they might end up having to rip this out. I don't know, but
this is clearly
I'm not playing. I'm not playing. I'm not
little
playing.
exit over there, but how can you have a creek with a dirt dam in the middle that's 30 feet above the lake? And all this concrete stuff. Okay, well, there's a wharf over here where you can fish from, fish the fish, and I guess they're in there, pretty big fish. And eventually it'll connect to the ocean, and they should be able to get spawning salmon up here, theoretically, I think. Certainly, like I say, they're almost all the way to Renfrew and Grandview Highway now. They've been able to work their way up, all the way up that way, and they got salmon this long in the creek, plus a beaver. Right at if you go to YouTube, type in beaver in Grandview Highway, you'll see the beaver and his mother beaver with his little baby beaver behind it. And they built a dam right in the Sleep Country, Canada, right where United Buy and Sell is there. Or what's the pet food store there? Tysol, right where Tysol is. There's a beaver up from Burnaby Lake, or what's the other lake called there? Anyhow, the big lake there. They come up. They're able to get up the creek now, and actually beavers in the creek. So you could have a beaver here. Why not? Oh, but he might cut down a tree. Yeah, well, so what? I mean, this is the whole North America was an ecosystem where the trees grew back and the beavers built their dams, and it all worked. I don't know why it wouldn't work now. There were beavers swimming around in here with this little house in there and a beaver dam here.
10 years ago, there were beavers at the pitch and putt. We used to pull them out.
At the pitch and putt, that's just a few.
Six blocks from here, yeah.
It's just 6 blocks. There are beavers in there, eh?
There were 10 years ago. I
Amazing.
saw a bear up there for the strike.
A bear?
Remember the strike? Yeah,
Wow.
full-grown brown bear. They
Yeah.
came and they tasered it and all that stuff.
They tasered it.
Oh, from the tree. The guy from
Oh,
Surrey.
God.
They hauled him off.
The grate is this part of the creek, and then it's going to go down here, and then it cuts through where it should be over here. But originally it came down through here. It came down like this originally and rerouted. Way up on top there, that is one big bird. I guess that shows you there's some kind of fish around here. So here we are, this is Hastings Creek. Again, at this point, they're just using it for stormwater management. In other words, they're just getting this, instead of putting the stormwater into the piping system, they want to just absorb it into the ground. So the whole idea is not to have a creek here, it's just to get the water to soak into the ground. Is it true that they intend to make it a salmon-bearing creek at some point? No.
I don't think it's feasible to
Of course, you can do it if you want to. They don't want to do it. But I'll just say that, and of course, it's not going to work as long as you absorb all the water into the ground, so there is no actual creek. So the first step would be to put an impermeable layer, at least for, whatever, about 1 foot deep of water, so that there would always be water in that 1 foot. And then if it gets to be 2 feet deep, then that excess can absorb through the banks. But there should be a base so that you'd have a flowing creek most of the time, and then that would allow salmon to go up.
They did brick area. Yeah. They were building it. I seen it.
Really? This has got it?
Yeah.
An impermeable layer.
Yeah, like a rubber.
Well, they didn't get their level out and make it downhill because,
They did the whole thing. From here all the way, carried it all.
Well, it doesn't seem to be working that well. Of course, there's no water coming through, so they haven't really hooked it up to the stormwater drainage system. I'll just complain about these plants here. Regimented. We'll have a plant every 3 feet. Just sort of a natural kind of. I think I have parking lot on the other side here too.
Oh, there's another one over there. That's just a scaffold.
All the different sources all over the place, it's spread all over. get it in one place, and also to provide a website where if you have any information, you can just upload it. We can upload it. Like, you know, if your grandfather wrote 10 pages on the neighborhood, all that stuff can be uploaded and made it accessible to everybody.
That's where everybody is.
So if you're at all interested, this fellow is just telling me he's got the oldest house where he lives, Penticton in 1903, and he wanted to research his house. So if you go to the Grandview Heritage Group website, one of our people, Penny Street, did an article on how to. There's a ton of stuff online now. Never used to be, just the last few years. So Penny Street did an article, and it's hyperlinked, so you can click on it. Makes it way easier to access different databases. That you can research your house quite easily. You can find out who lived in your house every single year in the last 100 years very easily, and what they did for a living. You can find out, you know, get the water permit for when the guy applied to
Connect the water
to your house. And there's building permits too, you know. And yeah, it's all on our website. Grandview Heritage Group. But you should form your own heritage group, and you can just copy. But it's another thing we're doing. We're trying to make what we've done easily replicatable, so that it's easy. And so, just a few days ago, Mount Pleasant formed a heritage group. And they basically just got to copy what we did because it's easy to do. And basically, and so we're trying to get everybody neighborhood in Vancouver, or every neighborhood in Canada or the world even, just to copy it, because I think it hasn't been done anywhere else. So this handout on this mention, the Hastings Park Master Plan. Somebody pointed out the $300 million. A lot of that's going to building great big new buildings and not creating a park. But they are committed to bringing back the creek. So I've showed you the way the creek was in 1877, the way it was in 1915, which seems to me it should be the goal for the restoration. And then here's the current sort of plan. And what I'll say about it is, if you look at the typical cross section of the creek that they plan to build, they've got the people about 100 feet away from the creek. They've got the creek sort of like a concrete trough, and it's inaccessible. As a matter of fact, the way they got the drawing, the people in the drawing can't see the creek. You know, I mean, I just think that's completely wrong.
Are they trying to make a riparian zone or something?
Huh?
Riparian zone?
Yeah, the old riparian zone. Yeah. Don't ever use the word creek. Use the word riparian, just to confuse people. Jargon. And there's the illustration of the creek from the actual master plan. Concrete line ditch, sort of. You know. I just think that's so wrong.
That's from Hinge Park in Southeast Falls Creek.
That's a picture I know, which I just blows my mind. You're right. Hinge Park, yeah. That's actually Columbia Creek at the west side of the Olympic Village. And this cost, the budget for this was $9 million, and this is what they did. Instead of having even a big cedar stub or something, they got all these logs just lying, like somebody had just logged off the area. And by the way, if you go there now, it looks way better because it's all overgrown. But it's just so lame. I mean, I don't know how they justify doing a concrete line ditch. Mother Nature doesn't do that. Why don't they just look at a real creek and imitate a real creek? Because that's perfectly designed to deal with high water, low water. It's designed by Mother Nature to deal with reality. These are just imaginary creeks, if you like. And I just don't get why they got to use concrete all over the place. I could complain about this particular creek for about half an hour.
It's probably the engineers that got involved.
Well, I know the guy who did it. I used to work with him, and he apologized. But they did get cut back in their budget from original $8 or $9 million down to $6 million for them. And that's what they did for all that money. They did a concrete line, symbolic sort of creek instead of a real creek. And then the beach here, like I'll remind you, you go to Kitts Beach, oh, isn't it great? You go to Spanish Banks, what a beautiful beach. You go to this beach here, they've lined it with great big chunks of broken rock. Why? Why? Oh, because there's big freighters out in the harbor. The wash of the freighters will destroy anything. We got to get the rocks there to protect it. They'll erode the embankment. That's 100% BS. Why is that 100% BS? Have you ever seen a freighter go roaring through the harbor? They're not allowed to. What's the speed limit? 3 miles an hour or something? So there's no bow waves from speedboats, or from freighters. And by the way, this is a protected harbor. If anywhere is going to get eroded, it's Kitts Beach or Spanish Banks. That's the open ocean. This is a protected inlet. if there should be a place to have a nice, beautiful beach like Kislana Beach, it should be right here. I mean, it's the old, us people who live on the east side are always suspect about how the west side, they do everything differently than they do on the east side. And I'll just remind you where I live in Grandview. We used to have a mile of beach on the north edge of Grandview and a mile of beach on the east end of Falls Creek. It's 100% gone now. We live in Grandview. We used to front on 2 big bodies of water. There's not 1 inch of waterfront access for the people at Grandview. It's been all taken away from us. Meanwhile, you got Kids Beach and all the west side is a completely accessible beach.
Where we're standing now is all fill. This used to be part of the inlet, right over to there, to the banks, right? And the rich people from New Westminster came here.
Yeah,
right?
in 1865. Yeah, to hang out.
But this is all water now.
Yeah, but they've done pardon me, but let me put it this way. They could do a way nicer job of this beach here. We would actually be a place where you want to come down and sit on the beach. Right now you cannot. There's a little tiny beach over there. It's completely filled up with driftwood. You can barely get to the water if you go to the official beach. Huh?
And it's dangerous.
And it's dangerous. Yeah, you can hurt yourself trying to climb across those rocks just to get down to the water. So it just requires massive public input. I hope I'm not overwhelming you with my sort of veiled anger, but you can see what they've done in the past. They should, for $300 million or $10 million, they should do a better job. And you got to make sure that the people involved in the project actually care, actually get it, actually appreciate nature, actually know what a real beach is, and make sure that they deliver it. Don't let them get away with this inaccessible pile of rocks you have here.
Are they getting rid of this?
Bruce, sorry to interrupt, but before people leave or before people head off, before people head off or leave, Chessa just wants to talk about, we have a little activity, kind of visioning thing for this park and the stream. So Chessa's going to just tell you a bit about it. And then questions for Sarah and Bruce.
Bruce, did you see that stump there?
So Chessa.
Sure. So my name's Chessa again. I'm from UBC. And a lot of the work that I do with students is around environmental education. So I work with stream projects like this and gardening. And we like to think of these places as spaces of hope because every space teaches you something. And so we're hopeful that these spaces will teach our students other ways of being and other ways of thinking about the natural world and our relationship to it. So we started a project with Linda's class. And last week using Tetra Packs, so juice packs and milk packs, we cut out shapes of animals that the students thought either used to live here or they would like to see come back into the space. And then we painted them with acrylic paints. And so what we'd like you to do is to also leave your hopes for the space by, on the back of it, maybe writing down a hope that you have for a species coming back or the way it might look or how people might interact with the space. We tie it to the fence. And so we were trying to kind of leave something here today. Because I believe this is going to be where the marsh is.
We think the city will actually take out at least half of the tennis court in favor of a small creek connection to a larger salt marsh and hopefully smoothing out that transition down to the waterfront like Bruce has been talking, removing some of that riprap and making a much more naturalized area. So as Chessa said, please take one of the animal shapes, flip them over, and with a Sharpie put down your hopes for the space, and then we'll have them hung on the fence as a display.
What you would love this park to look like. The shapes we have here, we kind of pre-cut the students. The kindergarten students did draw their own animals and paint them, and next week we're going to walk down, and the kindergartners are going to put their own hopes on the back and tie them up. So we'd love to collect the words afterwards and then teach them out to the students as well. So yeah, we invite you to join.
What are these t-shirts doing here?
They're for sale, but I don't have my sign now. I don't have a sign with me.
Okay,
they're $15. They're $15.
Oh yeah. That's a good idea.
I thought they were free.